Nigel Clark is supposed to join us shortly. Let me acknowledge Minister, there he is, freshly minted Member of Parliament as well. Welcome, Nigel. And let me acknowledge Ministers Favour Williams and Roddy Spencer, and members of the Bank of Jamaica and other agencies that are here. So let me give, I'm going to have just a few remarks, and then I'll ask Dr. Can I just say Dr. Uma? Perfect. Is that all right? Yes. I'll ask Dr. Uma to speak after that. A team from the IMF, led by Mission Chief Uma Ramakrishnan, visited Jamaica between the 26th of February and 9th of March of this year to conduct the third review of Jamaica's performance under the 3-year precautionary standby arrangement, as well as conduct an Article 4 review. So it was a double-barreled trip. Summary, the IMF team met with government officials, technical staff, private sector leaders, and other key stakeholders. The mission widened its review to include social and the climate-related challenges faced by Jamaica. And I want to say that we really welcome the widening of this review, because everything has to be taken in context. And this is a very important area. These topics included issues related to gender equality, crime and violence, climate change, and strengthening agricultural resilience, poverty, and youth development. Very, very key, in line with my much expressed concern about our inadequacies of human development in Jamaica. The shared assessment of the IMF and the government of Jamaica is that Jamaica's policy implementation under the economic reform program has been consistently strong. Jamaica met all the quantitative, fiscal, and monetary performance criteria under the program through to the end of December 2017. The government has also achieved all the structural benchmarks. Significant progress has also been made towards attaining the benchmarks beyond the March 2018 quarter. Mr. Lumsden and his team, we have to commend them for, they have the whip over me down at the Ministry of Finance. Jamaica's stable macroeconomic environment continues to be underpinned by the government's strong fiscal performance in alignment with the fiscal rules. Key macroeconomic indicators continue to reflect generally positive trends. Inflation and inflation expectations remain firmly anchored in single digits. International reserves continue to grow. GDP growth, while low, continues to rise. Domestic unemployment is at its lowest level since October of 2008. Incidentally, I was Minister of Finance at that time as well. Just a the current account of the balance of payments is projected to remain at sustainable levels. Private sector credit is growing. Market interest rates are at record lows, and investor sentiment remains high. The fiscal year 2018-19 budget, which was tabled in Parliament, and I opened the debate yesterday, includes a significant increase in capital expenditure by central government from 2.4% of GDP last year to 3% in this new fiscal year starting in April, in keeping with the growth and national security objectives of the government. The 2018-19 budget generates a primary surplus in line with the 7% of GDP program target and includes no new revenue measures, meaning no new taxes. Debt to GDP is projected to be 102% at the end of fiscal year 2017-18 and 90% at the end of 2019-20. The priority of the government continues to be focused on increasing domestic growth, boosting job creation, bolstering economic resilience, and improving living standards for all our citizens. Decisive actions will also continue to be taken to tackle the prevalence of crime. Significant progress has been made to date on finalizing a 4-year wage settlement with public sector workers that is consistent with the government's commitment which will assist the government's commitment to achieve its 9% of GDP wage bill target by the end of March 2019. The government remains committed to enhancing the efficiency, quality, and cost-effectiveness of the public service. Additional near-term action items include initiatives to further modernize the Bank of Jamaica's monetary policy framework, with price stability as its central mandate, as well as foster increased market development within the foreign exchange market and enhance the resilience of the private sector, of the financial sector. The IMF Executive Board is scheduled to consider the third review under the precautionary agreement in April of this year, and board approval will allow for the release of SDR 160.8 million, approximately US $233 million, which will bring the total amount immediately available to Jamaica in US dollars, just over $1 billion US dollars, would be available to be borrowed from the IMF by the government only if we need it. And I stress, right now, we don't need it, but it's available. So having said that, I now ask Uma to give some remarks, and then we'll take some questions for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning, everybody. We are here at the conclusion of the 2018 Article 4 consultation with Jamaica, as well as the third review under the standby arrangement. The authorities program supported by the IMF standby arrangement remains on track. All quantitative performance criteria and structural benchmarks for the review period ending December 2017 have been met. Like the Minister just said, consideration by the IMF's Executive Board is scheduled for April 2017. Upon approval, an additional $233 million US dollars will become available for a total amount of just over $1 billion US dollars. But as part of the Article 4 consultation that we also did along with the review, we took stock of where Jamaica stands and what medium to long-term reforms are needed to boost and sustain Jamaica's growth. The economic reform program that began in May 2013 has been a turning point for Jamaica. With broad-based social and political support for reforms, the Jamaican government, over 2 administrations, has embarked on a path of fiscal discipline, monetary and financial sector reforms, and wide-ranging structural improvements to break a decades-long cycle of high debt and low growth. Considerable progress has been achieved on macroeconomic policies and outcomes. Fiscal discipline, anchored by the Fiscal Responsibility Law, has been essential to reduce public debt and secure macroeconomic stability. Employment, like the Minister was mentioning, is at historic highs. Inflation and current account deficit are modest. International reserves are at a comfortable level, and external borrowing costs are at historic lows. However, growth and social outcomes have been somewhat discouraging. Entrenched structural obstacles, including crime, bureaucratic processes, insufficient labor force skills, and poor access to finance, continue to hinder productivity and growth. Not addressing these bottlenecks could pose risks for continued public support for the government's policy program. Structurally reducing the wage bill is critical for the government to reprioritize spending towards growth-enhancing projects. Creating the space for much-needed growth-enhancing capital spending and building the social safety net will require going beyond temporary remedies like wage freezes and adjustments to non-wage benefits. It will require high-quality measures to overhaul the compensation structure, to retain skills and reward performance, streamline allowances, and prioritize government functions and shed activities that are unaffordable. These reforms will inevitably lead to a smaller public sector workforce, but such a holistic approach will support a durable reduction in the wage bill without frequent discordant wage negotiations and enhance public service delivery with fewer but better paid public employees. Improving social outcomes and fostering inclusive growth will also require addressing the structural bottlenecks and creating an enabling environment for the private sector. Countering both weak social outcomes and escalating crime will take time, but will be essential for sustained economic growth. In this regard, the evidence suggests that early childhood education, intervention to improve school attendance, and skills training would foster a virtuous cycle of lower crime, higher wages, and stronger growth. On inflation targeting, formalizing the framework will entrench macroeconomic stability and promote growth. Upcoming revisions to the Bank of Jamaica Act, including a clear mandate for price stability and a reformed governance structure, will help institutionalize the inflation targeting framework. Successful inflation targeting will require a clear commitment to a flexible and market-determined exchange rate. This implies that foreign exchange sales should be confined to disorderly market conditions, especially given the reductions in the surrender requirements, and buy auctions should aim to build reserves in a non-disruptive way. Financial sector stability is a prerequisite for strong and sustained growth. In this regard, all reform considerations must be backed by a thorough assessment of appropriate regulations, risk management guidelines, and supervisory arrangements to ensure systemic stability. And on a final note, I would like to thank the Jamaican government, all our counterparts in the government, and across all parts of the society where we have had engagement over 2 weeks. We thank you for your hospitality and the candid discussions that you have helped us have throughout this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. And let me stress also our appreciation for the work of the IMF in working with us, not just in terms of the reviews, but critically, the IMF is also involved at the technical assistance level across various critical areas. So we value the partnership. Thank you very much. With that, we are ready to take some questions. I'm sure all of them will be directed to Uma, so I'll just convey them to her. Any questions from the press? Yes? Yes, sir?
Okay. Mr. Shaw, yesterday during your yesterday during your budget presentation, you announced that there will be no new testing. Do you foresee this having any negative impact on the country's ability to meet future IMF targets?
No, not at all. The issue is that, you know, where we have arrived at, you know, it's not accidental. There's been a considerable amount of emphasis placed on fiscal consolidation and fiscal responsibility. And at the same time, we have been stressing compliance as an area that really needs work and needs even more work now. And that's what I'm going to be concentrating on this new fiscal year. We're going to focus on areas of compliance across the major tax types at the tax administration of Jamaica, as well as critically the customs area. We are going to, I'm seeking to have literally 100% scanning of all containers coming into the country with state-of-the-art scanning equipment. We're going to cut down on the corruption. We're going to cut down on the illegal importation of a lot of things like cigarettes and other things that are coming in and are robbing the country of revenue. And so the emphasis in the new fiscal year is not on simply putting on more taxes. The emphasis is that we are going to emphasize compliance. And that compliance is not just for revenue. It's also for national security. I want to say one more point, though, about the tax package, because I noticed that on social media, it's being circulated that there was no tax package in 2013, and that the minister at the time was quoted as saying there are no new taxes. I just want to correct that to say that there were no new taxes imposed in April when the minister spoke, because he had in fact placed the tax package from February of the same year, a pretty substantial amount, in fact, somewhere in the region of about at least $15 billion was the tax package. So there was a tax package in 2013. It's just that it was imposed before the time of the budget presentation. I want to make that absolutely clear so we can cut out the mischief on social media. Yes.
Hi, Kalila Reynolds, Nationwide News. In a discussion on my program this morning, it was suggested that while no new taxes are, of course, welcome, always welcome, it might be time to actually start rolling back some of the heftier taxes, particularly on the banks, a sector that's been taxed more heavily than other business sectors in the country. What's your thought on this?
Well, you know, as minister, I have a policy of phasing things in. and then we can also phase things out. So it goes two ways. But everything has to be a process. We have to, it's really one step at a time. So for instance, we are looking at the issue of the assets taxes, for instance, with a view to not just saying chop it off, but eventually to reduce the rate for the asset tax. But it's one step at a time, and we can't do everything at the same time. But except to say, if we can plug that hole of illicit imports that robs the Treasury, robs the customs, then we can reach a point where we can actually lower the rate of customs, the duties. If everybody complies and everybody pays, then we can have lower rates. And that is an objective that I have.
Do we have any more questions?
Mr. Collister.
Hi, Minister. Good to hear about the no new taxes. Can you give us you mentioned that there's 15,000 people on the tax roll. Can you give
entered
the tax roll? Do you have a split between what portion of those are sort of new entrants to the labor force? Obviously, you've had some labor force, some employment growth over the last few years, and those that are people who might have been not paying before but are now part of the...
Well, I could promise you that analysis. I could have it done. I wouldn't have that off the top of my head now, but Minister, help me to get that information.
Okay, because that's particularly interesting based on the fact that you've also raised your the threshold over the same period.
Yeah.
So that it could suggest it's actually even more that would have been on a net basis.
But certainly a portion of it would be related to the job market.
Yes. And the second thing is, do you have an idea of how much revenue is lost through the port? Obviously, that has been an issue forever, and if you're going to finally tackle it, that's wonderful. But do you have an idea?
How much revenue?
How much revenue loss on a yearly basis? Obviously, it would be a range, but how much revenue loss do you think is lost at the port from people not paying?
Oh, at the port. It's significant.
Okay.
It is significant. It is estimated that if we can plug the corruption, that leakage there could see revenue increasing by somewhere between, in some cases, in other jurisdictions that have put in the technologies we are talking about, anywhere from 20 to 30 to 40% increase in revenue at customs. That is how significant the problem is.
Okay, well, that's in line with the rough estimates the Chamber of Commerce has had for many, many years.
So why didn't you tell me that before?
I think they have told successive ministers, but anyway.
You're testing me, right?
Yes, sir. Okay, and for Uma, have you got any particular thoughts on the informal economy? You mentioned a set of issues which are really all informal related, crime, etc. So perhaps you could just give us a preview of what you might put in the Article 4 report.
Thank you. Informality is indeed a fairly big problem in the country, but this is not peculiar to Jamaica. Many emerging market countries in the world and advanced economies have informal sectors, so this is not a unique problem. Estimates, but these estimates are pretty old, are that the informal sector could be about 40% in Jamaica, which is a large number, but there are countries with even larger informal sectors. But as I said, this is a fairly dated information, and what we would need is newer estimates to understand better and where these informalities may lie. So in order to be able to provide, to further any progress from informality into formality, we would need to do further analysis. But that said, one of the factors that should bring more formality in the economy is the shift from direct to indirect taxes. That should play in the favor of formality.
Mr. Moore?
Incidentally, before the next question, let me give the specific date of the tax measures of 2013, prior to the budget. The tax package was placed in the House on the 12th of February, 2013. And the package was $15.9 billion imposed in February prior to the budget debate later on. So at budget time, the minister then declared no new taxes in this budget.
Please stand, please.
Mr. Shaw, you mentioned that progress is made on the 4-year wage agreement with public sector workers, but there are some have rejected the revised wage offer. Is the government prepared to give a better wage offer to public sector workers, and can this be done without negatively impacting the government's ability to meet IMF targets?
The government is unable to make a better wage offer at this time. And I want to stress, as I did yesterday, we're asking for the public sector unions to be reasonable. It is my government that has had the tradition of doing our very best for public sector workers. When I was minister first time around, we had 15% in 1 year, 7% in the following year. We then had to go through a series of wage freezes because we had the global impact of the global economic crisis, and this went on into the next administration. And indeed, in the previous administration, they had wage freezes 2012, 13, 14. Not until 2015 was there a wage of increase of 4% in 1 year and 3% in the second year. I think that was the period 14 to 16, 2 years. 4% and 3%, okay? And then we took over again. So in that previous 4 years, the total was 4% and 3%, 2 years, 7%, plus increments, don't forget that. Some people don't want us to talk about the performance increments, but it's real because it's a part of the budget and it's money. The increments of 2.5% have to be added. So in that 4-year period, when you add the increments over the 4 years, plus the 4 and 3, you had a total of about, what, 17% increase in that 4-year period. Then this new 4-year period that we're talking about now, what is the aggregate? 5% in year 1, which we'll be paying now retroactive to April of last year, 2% in year 2, 4% in year 3, 5% in year 4. Add the increments. When you add the increments to that incrementals, to that 16%, you add the 10% increments, that's 26% in the second 4 years. It's a far more attractive arrangement than in the previous 4 years. We are doing our very best, and I want to stress that it is fiscally important that we pay the 5% retroactive to April last year in this budget that ends in March. This payday will see that amount being paid because in terms of our accounting, we cannot take that liability over into the next fiscal year. So let's leave it at that. I see Darlene looks more comfortable with that, right, Darlene?
Minister Shaw, I take chair's privilege. Could you give, Robert here, could you give me a better explanation of the increments and the impact that it will have on the 16% over the period? I think, no, but many people have not understood it over a period.
Increments are an automatic 2.5% that most, by and large, pretty much all the public sector gets. It's called a performance increment. And it's 2.5% each year. So when you discuss, when you have a negotiation and you say, we're giving you 5% in year 1, it's really 7.5% because the increment is there. It is a real increase. So over 4 years, that's how you get 10% increments. Then you add that to the 16% which we've offered, and that becomes 26%. Incidentally, the police gets 28% because their increment is 3% and not 2.5%. So that goes to 18% and you add, sorry, that goes to the 16% and you add the 12% to that for the police. That's 28%. That clearer, Robert?
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Kalila?
Thank you very much.
2 questions. One is a follow-up to that one from Minister Shaw. So even though the teachers have said if you pay this money, it's union busting, you're still going ahead with it.
Well, let me say clearly that, first of all, that's not correct. Let's put it that way. It is not unprecedented that you start paying while negotiations continue. That has happened before. In fact, on many occasions as minister, I've been signing wage agreements when the increases have long gone. So it's not unusual.
Next question is for Dr. Ramakrishnan. I hope you didn't feel left out. Well, it said that there are no coincidences. So this press conference, the day after the minister makes his budget presentation, is this an IMF endorsement of the budget?
As part of the program engagement that we have with the government, it is, you know, there are targets in the program and they are very well defined. And these targets are developed in consultation with the government and the IMF. And the broad strokes of the program have never changed in terms of achieving debt reduction and the necessary primary surplus to go with it. So it is in that line that we fully support the current budget. And the intricacies of it are the policy choices the government has to figure out, and that's where we stand. So yes, in terms of the overall reach of the budget and where it stands, we fully support this budget. And the timing is pure coincidence.
Although I have to say that it has been very challenging to have the IDB conference and the IMF and budget all in one.
And we do appreciate the time that you have dedicated to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions this morning?
Well, let me thank everyone and thank you, Doctor, and hope that you and your team have a safe trip back to Washington.
Thank you very much.
God bless you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you to everyone for coming to the OPM for this press conference.
Pink eye running belly, even flu. Germs can make them happen to you.
Put germs on our manners with these. Cover your mouth when you cough and sneeze. Always wash your hand with water and soap. Keep dirty hands from your eyes and your nose and your mouth. You don't want to be sick, take care. Practice every day, no germs down here.
A message from the Ministry of Health.
Crime Stop Jamaica presents CS311. Unsolved crimes, safety tips, did you know? Watch that scam, missing, most wanted. We give you the facts, the stats, everything you should know about the law, safety, and you. Brought to you in association with PBCJ and our sponsors, Musson Foundation, National Bakery, King Alarm, and Grace Kennedy. Be sure to tune in Monday nights at 9 p.m., starting April 16.
When we the people speak out, changes happen.
True thing. I remember how we women speak out hard to get maternity leave.
Our voices and letters supported the formation of Indicom to deal with the protection of citizens.